Uh, Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay.
Morning.
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 All right. We have to start now. It's 10 o'clock. Ladies and gentlemen, greetings to you all. My name is Charles Mwaila, and I'm the chairperson of the National Skills Authority. The time is 10 o'clock. This webinar is going to run up to 12:30. Let me start by acknowledging the presence of the following invited organizations and members: the National Skills Authority members, the Executive Officer of the National Skills Authority and the Secretariat, government representatives, sector education and training authorities, Universities South Africa, South African College Principals Organization, Technical Vocational Education and Training Colleges, Congress of South African Trade Unions, Federations of Unions of South Africa, National Council of Trade Unions, South African Youth Council, Women's National Coalition, South African National Civic Organization, Disabled People South Africa, members from Business Unity South Africa, members from Black Business Council, members from Association of Private Providers of Education, Training and Development, skills experts, researchers, speakers, presenters, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is with great pleasure to address you today, making use of this virtual platform. I welcome all the participants in this webinar, hosted by the National Skills Authority in partnership with Mail and Guardian. The National Skills Authority will be hosting a series of webinars, and this is part one of the series that are intended to engage audiences on how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting education, skills development, and training in South Africa, and to ensure that together we come up with an appropriate response. Ladies and gentlemen, it's obvious that the world of work globally is undergoing rapid and complex changes, not only as a result of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, but due to a myriad of factors which must also be considered in our comprehensive response. These factors include, among others, technological advancement, demographics, globalization, and climate change. These issues are also putting enormous pressure on the traditional post-school education and training systems, calling for improved quality and new approaches to lifelong learning. As the National Skills Authority, we continue to assess and monitor the situation to ensure that we advise the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Technology appropriately on the necessary policy shifts. As South Africans, we are a resilient nation. When confronted with an extraordinary situation, in order to survive and thrive, we need to come up with extraordinary measures that must give us extraordinary results. Once again, a warm welcome to all the participants. Your active participation will be highly appreciated throughout the session. At this point, let me briefly lay some ground rules. Kindly note that everyone will be on mute to avoid background noises. Our technical team will be managing the chat functionality where you'll be able to enter your questions and comments in the question box throughout the presentations. Each of the speakers is allocated 20 minutes for the presentation and additional 20 minutes for questions and discussion. Your engagements in this session will be highly appreciated, as outcomes from this series will provide guidance on various measures that should be considered by all sectors during this time. Allow me to introduce the following speakers that will contribute to the successful execution of today's webinar. Dr. Tabu Mashongwane, the NSA Executive Officer. He will be the moderator for the day. The presenters are as follows. Ms. Melody Kama will be the first speaker. Ms. Melody Kama is a learning and development consultant and co-founder of My Future Work. Her presentation will focus on drivers of the changing nature of work, skills of the future, proactive planning for upskilling, reskilling, and case studies. The second speaker is Professor Hussein Rasool. Professor Rasool is a lead researcher at FR Research Services, a labor market research, training, and providing advisory consultancy services, both locally and internationally. His presentation will focus on reforms to empower SETAs to a post-COVID-19 world, proposed radical reforms to ensure that SETAs step up to the plate in a post-COVID-19 world. The last speaker for the day, Ms. Nazreen Mani. Ms. Nazreen Mani is a former member of the National Skills Authority. She is the Executive Director of Global Apprenticeship Network and a specialist in the field of social policy with special focus on youth employment and skills development. She'll be joining us from Geneva. Her presentation will focus on trends, innovations, and challenges at a global level and how these will influence the future of work. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you for joining us today. We hope you find the information presented today valuable. I want to also encourage you to deliberate and make your contributions during this session. I believe that working together, we can do better and achieve more. I now call upon the first speaker, Melody, and before she comes on the podium, I would like to indicate that the moderator will take over. I'll come back to give the summary of the proceedings at the end. Over to you, Melody. I thank you all.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to begin my presentation. Now, I don't know if you can see. Okay, so the presentation focuses on drivers of change, skills of the future, and really looking at how the individual can fit in. Often when we have conversations about skills of the future, it's always at like a high level, organizational level, but we need to move to a place now more than ever where we start to help the individual start to fit in, because this problem is going to take more than just the leaders to solve, but it's time for all of us to pull together, and it's important that the individual starts to see themselves. And the 2 points of discussion, it's 6 key drivers of change in the nature of work and skills of the future. So looking back at just what the projections were before COVID-19, and this is based on the research that was done by Accenture, we were looking at 5 million jobs were at risk of automation, 35% of all jobs were at risk, and then we had a 30% unemployment and 70% youth unemployment. I'm pretty sure that those numbers have drastically changed by now, and the next statistics are probably going to be, worse than what we are looking at. And what Accenture was advising at the time was, by doubling the pace at which our workforce acquires relevant digital skills, South Africa can reduce the share of jobs from 5.7 million jobs to 2.5 million jobs. Now at this stage, we need to do more than just doubling the pace, because people have lost a lot of jobs. So now there are drastic measures that have to happen. Just looking at the sectors that have been impacted by COVID-19, and this was released by McKinsey, and this was during lockdown level 5. So when we're in lockdown level 5 in South Africa. And if you look at the sectors that, are highly impacted, the likes of tourism and hospitality being the most impacted, all the way to pharmaceuticals, which is the one that's least impacted, understandably, because they are probably the most active sector globally with helping to develop solutions, to fight this virus that we are all dealing with. But the point of this report is that every sector is impacted, right, one way or another, globally and for us, in South Africa. So we need to, work harder now. What the Reserve Bank was projecting at the time, and this was also released during lockdown level 5, was that plus minus 1,600 businesses are going to be insolvent in 2020. And this is a disaster for us as South Africa because we're already struggling in this sector, trying to get more businesses to come up, trying to get more SMEs and more innovation going through businesses. So this is, poses a huge challenge for us. What we've seen, what has happened, what is positive with COVID-19 is that when it comes to digital transformation is that it has fast-paced digital transformation. We were moving at a snail pace. Businesses were taking longer to adapt to digital. And what we've seen happening is that a very instant rise in cloud computing, AI, IoT, and digital collaboration and virtual work. This used to take, a long time because people felt like the old way works best. Event organizers found an alternative ways to go to market as we are all gathered here. If one had proposed this a few months back, we all would have looked at them and thought, it's just so much better in person. But here we found a way and we made it work. Schools and universities went from talking about online learning for 10 years to implementing it, within 1 week, showing that, where there's a will, there's a way. Remote working moved from being just a grudge allowance for the very limited proportion of employees to a matter of business survivals. And those managers who were counting bums on seats now are managing workers remotely, and they've had to adapt to this. So digital transformation has moved forward, and we are in a better place in that sense. We are still, though, sitting with this problem, which was before COVID-19, we still had this issue, and we still, facing these issues that employees and entrepreneurs, there's, a very big digital skills shortage, and the gap is still big. And it is impacting the organization's ability to compete and innovate. So what is the solution, right, that we've seen happening globally in different industries and different companies is that we do need to bridge this skills gap and promote innovation through digital upskilling and reskilling of employees and entrepreneurs. And our solutions need to be able to live beyond COVID-19. These are the 6 drivers of change, right, according to a study that was released by the Institute of the Future. And these 6 drivers of change are extreme longevity. With COVID-19, I think that has become even more important, right? The whole reason why we're on lockdown is because we all want to live longer. One of the other key drivers being the rise of smart machines and systems, computational world, new media ecology, superstructured organizations, and a globally connected world. This is what's driving digital transformation globally, and this is what's also driving it, in the country. In terms of bringing it to skills, right? How those key drivers then affect the skills and the skills that are going to be required in order for people to be able to respond to those key drivers. It's sense making being an important skill, the ability to determine meaning. We're looking at social intelligence, the ability to connect to others, novel adaptive thinking, cross-cultural competency, conceptual thinking, virtual collaboration, which has become, quite a big deal. And, a lot of us have risen to the occasion of virtual collaboration. This exercise that we're doing today is a big part of virtual collaboration. Design mindset, cognitive load management, transdisciplinary, and new media literacy. This exercise today as well is part of new media literacy. We've all had to learn to register to systems and log on. And it's not just the only system we've learned, we've had to learn multiple new systems in the past couple of months. But how does all of this then come together? Looking at the 6 key drivers and looking at the skills. So let's look at this one, for example. If you look at the rise of smart machine systems. So that key driver, what skills does one need? You will need sense making, social intelligence, adaptive novel thinking. But those skills are also required, to be able, to work with the key driver of a globally connected world. So ultimately, all of these key drivers are connected, and all of these skills are interconnected, as well in a way. Looking, at what are the top 10 emerging roles, right? as observed by recruitment trends, and influenced by these key drivers. Software engineering is at the top. Marketing specialist, is also at the top, and probably speaking more to digital marketing, marketing managers, writers, financial advisors, and so forth. And the roles that are decreasing as observed by recruitment trends is, you're looking at your civil engineering technician, electrical engineer, finance officers, because these are jobs where the task can be automated. So any jobs where the task can be automated, those roles are decreasing. So I thought I'd take a case study where we look at the mining industry as an example, where what are the key drivers in the mining industry? So you are looking at the rise of smart mission systems, a computational world, new media ecology, and superstructured organization. There are more key drivers than this, but these are the ones that I select study. And how has this impacted the industry? You have falling commodity prices and depletion of easy-to-reach minerals. They put pressure on the profitability of mining operations. And mining in South Africa is mostly deep, risky, and expensive. So you find that now there's a lot of use when it comes to technology, looking at things like drone application, IoT, improved communication system using cloud and AI. And they are changing the way that underground mining is working, by using this digital technology. So now you've got new and improved methods of collecting data, which do increase efficiency, but at the same time now, where does that leave the people, right? Where does that leave the human beings, and how are they impacted? These are the decreasing roles now in the mining industry, like your payroll and timekeeping clerks, because these are the tasks that can be automated. Surveying and mapping technicians, procurement clerks, cane host, freight and cargo, and increasing roles, you're looking at underground drone operator, application designer, data analyst, roles that were never really that prevalent in this sector before. And these are the new jobs that are arising. And this, with case study, it also shows us that with digital transformation, even though certain roles are decreasing, there is always a rise in new jobs because of innovation. And this is what we have to keep up with, the upskilling of people to these new jobs. And with the upskilling of people to these new jobs, it's not always, you don't always have to start, from scratch. Yes, you can get, people who are new, still coming into the workplace. But when we look at the employees that we currently have, how do we help that employee upskill? So as an example, you look at a payroll and timekeeping clerk, right? And procurement clerks who work in this mining industry. They already have these skills, which are sense-making, cross-cultural competencies, and social intelligence because of the work that they do. How do you upskill that individual? You can upskill that individual to a position of a data analyst, right? Because a data analyst requires 3 of those skills that they already have. So they need to just adapt 2 more skills, which are new media literacy and conceptual thinking. That person already has sense-making, cross-cultural competency, and social intelligence. And how then do you help that person to upskill? You can, for example, look at a course in data literacy and analysis, where you can find a UCT online course, that runs for 6 weeks. That's actually a real course that exists. And that's one of the case studies of how you can help an individual, to upskill, and how individuals can start to see themselves in the space. What we've noticed as well with businesses, this is the part that they struggle with the most. I guess a question of, whenever you think about the new skills that you need for when you're in a digital transformation strategy, it's always looking outside. But we have to look inside first, and we have to make these connections of looking at the skills that people have and upskilling them, or possibly even reskilling them to new roles, because even though the job might be different, there are certain skills that you've acquired in your current role that you can take on to a new role. Here's another example as well from mining industry. So this would be then a redesigner of underground operations, right? So what is driving this? Rise of smart machine systems, computational world, and new media ecology. So the skills that the person would need is sense-making, design mindset, conceptual thinking, and what sort of technologies are they going to be using? Drone technology, proximity sensor, which is IoT, software application, and improved communication system, which is cloud and AI. And this is, the skills that the person needs to acquire in order for them to be able to continue their work as a redesigner of underground operations. In conclusion, I just want to close with this, to say that digital upskilling is not the only solution, and I'm not even trying to present it as the only solution, but it's one of the very important solutions in order for us to be able to combat unemployment and positively impact our economy. Entrepreneurship and innovation is definitely a way to go. We have to empower entrepreneurs. We have to drive innovations. And even in large organizations, you have to adopt an entrepreneurial culture in order for you to drive innovation and position the organization to compete in the digital economy. And that concludes my presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I guess we are now going to be, I've been looking at the chat. There are people who have actually been raising questions around availability of copies, and I'm happy that they have been well responded to by our moderators and technicians. And also the recording of this this webinar will be available in a few days' time. And the good thing is we have also been joined by various people, including not only our speaker, Ms. Nazarene Mani from Switzerland, but also from around the world, other people are joining this webinar. Like the chairperson actually emphasized the importance of us engaging. You have clearly outlined in your first take in terms of the topic of the day, what the real issues are. And you are now also citing number of important things and the trends drivers if we are to make a headway in terms of skilling our people. Now, there will be obviously questions in the chat that we are going to be taking up. But firstly, let me say, we often hear that in our country and globally, youth hold key future progress. So how can South Africa best capitalize on its youth? I mean, you are clearly outlining the impact of digitization on our lives as well as our future of work. But we have to then be saying to ourselves, how far is South Africa with regard to what you are now articulating? Let me check the chat if there are questions, so as you are able then to respond to some of those questions. I'm not sure from your side whether you are able to pick up any question from your side. Melanie?
Yes, I am seeing a couple of questions here, but I don't know which ones you'd like to prioritize.
Now, look, for me, is because there are so far not so many questions for now. Try and take a bite of a few of them. We still have some couple of minutes just to ensure that we respond to questions. Like I've outlined earlier on, it's not only yourself who's going to be responding to questions. I mean, other presenters can also just write in the chat, also including the people. I mean, there are very knowledgeable people who can also be assisting in terms of responding to some of these questions. Okay, maybe if you talk to what I have reflected on, as well as some couple of questions.
Okay, so just speaking to what you were saying about the youth and how do we capitalize, on our youth. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And what we have observed in as an organization, what is missing is to have that central place, right? That one central place where we can help our youth. So, and I'm going to use as an example, where there's a country called Luxembourg, and it's, in France, right? And they've got a framework that they've developed that's called the Luxembourg model. And the whole purpose of that framework is to ensure that there is no idea in the country that falls through the cracks. And they've built this institution that really just focuses on upskilling and reskilling for digital. And yes, it's they are privileged countries, one of the richest countries in the world, and they only have 600,000 citizens, which is like the size of Durban. But there's something to learn from that, right? Just in terms of a framework that we can take and we can adopt in terms of centralizing how we can upskill and be able to help our youth. At the moment, there are lots of initiatives that are happening in the country, but it is all spread out, right? Everybody's doing their own thing. This institution is doing their own thing. That institution is doing their own thing. And yes, people are, trying to come together through seminars and conversations. But I think that it's important that we start to institutionalize the way that we are going to upskill and reskill our workforce in South Africa. So that's my take on that.
Okay. I see Thulani Shabalala here is actually saying, how does one encourage the culture of dynamism, which is at the heart of our people, open to acquire new skills and adapt to ever-changing market skill? Maybe you can also take the question from Gloria Massey. Are you able to see that? She says, okay.
What is your opinion?
Yeah.
So she's saying, what is your opinion on the importance of social and emotional learning skills? Oh, that's very important.
Maybe
so I'm going to start with this question. Very important, Gloria. Pardon? Sorry, Doctor.
Melody, just take 5 questions, and then we'll take another round of questions. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, no problem. Noted. So, importance of social and emotional learning skills. These are soft skills. And soft skills are very important. This is often overlooked, right, in organizations, because the question that organizations always ask is, how does this affect bottom line? What is the ROI when you're looking at soft skills? How is social and emotional learning? So when organizations provide money for training, it's not very often that an organization will have money for someone to go and learn soft skills. It's not something that, is regarded as that important. But in this era that we are in right now, in this phase of transition, it's very important that we start to prioritize, these soft skills. In, the presentation that I did, a lot of those skills are actually soft skills. They're not even hard skills. And it just shows that they are a very important part when it comes to the key drivers, of change. So my answer is very important. Social and emotional learning is very important. Okay, so let me just see, Thulani Shabalala, how does one encourage the culture of dynamism, which is at the heart of our people, open to acquire new skills and adapt to an ever-changing market skills? I think, there's different ways. I'll probably go back again to my answer of institutionalizing the way that we, upskill and reskill, the people, because that starts to impact this culture of learning. And with the culture of learning, then we start to be able to embrace different ways and different things that people are bringing, to the table. And yes, it's very important. And it is the heart, of where, our people acquire new skills and adapt to an ever-changing market. I don't know if I've answered your question, Thulani Shabalala. And so Pamela says, SA struggles with a centralized approach because we are not organized as developed countries. What would be my recommendation to government through the CETAs? I love your question. Yes, we are struggling very much because of organization. And it actually takes me to a quote that one of my favorite authors, his name is Yuval Harari, and is a futurist. And his quote is on a book that he wrote, Homogenesis, that the communities, right, in the past that have been able to survive and better reap the rewards of industrial revolutions are the communities that were better able to organize themselves. And so this organization, being able to be organized as a country is super important. And really my advice to government and through the CETAs would be, we have to come together. We really do have to come together in sort of having this institution for digital And instead of just focusing, yes, the different institutions can still contribute to that, but there has to be that central place that we can all go to, and there has to be that framework that we must all work with. And until we do that, I think that we are still going to struggle a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you have time for me to take another one.
Yeah. Take 2 more.
Okay, so I see Linnell Farrell saying skill development providers have been closed for 95 days. When will these training providers be able to reopen face-to-face learning interventions? That's a very interesting one, Linnell, because the question I guess I'm going to be asking is, should we really be pushing, to go back to face-to-face learning interventions? And I'm saying this very much aware of the fact that there are still parts, of our country that have not even seen the rewards of the second industrial revolution, right, which is the electricity revolution. And that does, of course, pose difficulty when it comes to providing training. And maybe the institutions, yes, are definitely going to open, but I think that what we need to be driving for more than anything is solutions on closing this digital divide and ensuring that the people that don't have access to digital start to have access to digital. Because to try and force, the old ways back are we not really going back? And I'm not saying we shouldn't accommodate people that can access digital solutions at the moment. But for me, my take is that as a country, we need to be working harder and putting more resources towards closing the digital divide and helping institutions as well to digitize as well, so that you can offer, your training anywhere. So for example, as an institution as well with my future work, we've got a digital academy, right, that we actually built during the lockdown. And it was, part of that response. And we've seen through the Digital Academy, we've actually been able to provide training to people in 5 different provinces, right? Entrepreneurs that were engaged in a program and they came from 5 different provinces. And so these are the solutions that we need to be looking at more than anything, and taking the learnings from that and saying, what are people struggling with when it comes to using digital solutions, and solving those problems so that we move forward as a country, instead of focusing more on face-to-face. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for the first round of questions. I see many more questions are coming forward, but then can I then request participants, because we will then focus on the chat box, but then the questions that are marked with a Q, obviously, then becomes a question, and otherwise it becomes difficult because to sift through, some are comments and may not necessarily need our attention now. But like I've said, other participants may also begin to post in the chat box some of the responses. The good thing is you have actually saved a lot of time on your presentation, so we still have another few minutes to take some more questions. And in fact, if you feel that it is necessary maybe to go back to a particular slide, emphasize a particular point, you are free to do so. So shall we then also take another 5 questions, which will obviously be our last rounds of questions, and before we move to the next speaker. But before we do so, South Africa is challenged with high unemployment rate, particularly affecting young people. We were standing at about 3.2 some few years ago million of the need generation.
Yes.
Now that graph has actually gone up. I guess it might be now around 3.4, even more. So this is a big challenge, and issues of rurality, where there is a lack of access to infrastructure and resources in relation to digitization. It's a big challenge, and
yes.
we then need to be saying,
yes.
how then do we respond if we are to really move forward the way you are proposing? We really need to not neglect issues of infrastructure and resourcing of our many people who want to access these services. So it's something that probably we then have to reflect on. Just take the next set of questions. The next set of first few questions and then we'll see how far we can go before we move on to the next speaker.
Okay, so I see an interesting question from Khabo Mateja saying, what changes in our school curriculum are precipitated by the rising wave of future jobs? Or is our school curriculum in current relevant to produce workers of the future? So I'm not really quite, sure what schools are working on at the moment. But I'll tell you what I have observed again, just because of COVID-19 fast-tracking digital transformation, right? Schools, a lot of schools, and now I'm going to talk about Model C schools, which also didn't have a lot of digital before. They've adapted, right, where you find online classrooms are now being offered, right? Things that, didn't exist before. I have two little children, one is 6 years old and one is 8 years old. And what has been probably my biggest nightmare of parenting was digital transformation with the 6-year-old and the 8-year-old. Having to teach them how to work a virtual classroom. I mean, it was terrible in the first couple of weeks. And I look at it now and I'm like, we're at a place where I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old who can learn virtually, right? These are the workers of the future. And yes, they're privileged children. So this does not apply, to all the children in the country. I'm very much well aware of that. But again, they also did not know how to do this before. And now we are in a different place. I know that with a lot of schools that have budgets, they've, done those adjustments. And that is a huge contribution to producing the workers of the future. As far as what still needs to be done, for the other underprivileged schools, there's still a lot of work to be done, because ideally we then want all the children to be able to have access, to that, and it should just not be, for the privileged few. I think that what we need to work towards more than anything now is, equality and ensuring that, all the children receive the same. And I'm not sure, what efforts have been going in towards that, because, I'm not really part of that educational sector. Yeah.
Okay, Melody, what I was reflecting on, I see is that Maimuna Ismaili is actually emphasizing that point to say, as part of his question, we cannot afford to have a discussion about digital or virtual learning without addressing the infrastructure issues faced in developing countries such as South Africa, when access to electricity is an issue. So in other words, he's actually talking to the issue, the point I was raising. But I guess as you round off later on, you will then talk to that particular issue. I would want you also to pick another 3 to 4 questions, and then you'll then be summarizing.
Yes, I just want to make a comment as well, on Mr. or Ms. Ismaili's comment. Very much, agree with that. Like I said before, there are parts of our country that have not even seen the second industrial revolution, right? Which is the electricity revolution, right? Because, they are, rural is still quite a huge issue. And of course, we can never address the issues of digital without addressing the issues of infrastructure. And with that being said, we still have to be able to move forward with parts of the country that can, while addressing the other issues, so not neglecting them. We can't hold everything, and put everything on hold, because the world is not waiting for us. It's not going to wait for us and say we want South Africa to catch up. So, and unfortunately for us, we need to be able to pull our resources together and implement all at the same time. I don't know how we're going to do that, but that's what needs to happen. While we are addressing the issues of electricity in other parts of the world, we do have to implement digital transformation as well in the parts of the world that can. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Let me just see what other questions. So there's David here who says, have tried everything and the only option left is to, oh, sorry, no, I don't think that's a question. I think it's something else.
Maybe let me assist you here. There's Vuyo Nwaiba. Can you see Vuyo Nwaiba, who's saying, looking at the skills of the future, when we are talking about sectors, can we identify and name companies locally and globally that are in the sectors of the future, so that the unemployed can know exactly which companies are likely to be looking for employees? If you can, yes.
Speak to that. Yes, I mean, and I mean that also falls, I guess, to the side of recruitment as well. I mean, that would have been something a bit difficult for me to include in all of this presentation, because we have to be looking at specific jobs, right? But I think that, and in terms of our recruitment, I think in South Africa, I think that we are in a place where people are able to access what jobs, do they need. I got a link, I think this was 2 days ago, via WhatsApp, where Amazon in South Africa is looking to employ 7,000 people, right, for work from home jobs in customer service. So there is stuff like that happening. There's different portals where people can access it. Like, for example, the one that I'm speaking about, if you go to the Amazon website and you search under South Africa, you'll be able to see, those jobs that are advertised. And these are all work from home jobs for customer service people. And yes, we do, need to highlight that. But, that falls more under, I guess, recruitment. Yeah.
Can you also talk to the other 3 questions from Donovan Meyer, Samantha May, and Bulelani April? Are you able to see those questions?
Okay, let me just see if I can scroll up. They're probably at the bottom. Meyer.
Donovan Meyer is saying, how can we skill people in public employment programs in communities offering social services? Are you there?
Okay. Yes, I can see it. How can we skill people in public employment programs in communities offering social services? Yeah, I'm not sure, who would be in charge, I guess, Donovan, sorry, about, who upskill the people in the sector. I mean, my assumption would be, and sorry if I'm like completely speaking out of 10, at the risk of really trying to answer your question, my assumption would be this is probably, a part where government comes in, right? Because we're talking public employment programs and in community offering and social services. This is what I guess the SETAs, the role that the SETAs play. And this is, I guess, the role where government plays as well. And also with private institution, probably as part of their CSI as well. Those are just top of my head solutions that I would think of, just in terms of who would fund this and who would, the people who would run this training to ensure that public employment programs and in communities also get upskilling as well, access to upskilling. Okay. And then Samantha May, who says, how do we encourage employers to look beyond degree plus experience and see the value in new generation skills and self-learning? Oh, I love your question, Samantha. Culture, because this speaks to culture more than anything else. I've seen and heard of this so many times where businesses recruit people, right, based on degree and experience. They even send people, for training. The person goes and gets the training that they need and then come back and they can't even implement, the training, right, that they have learned. But this has to do with a culture shift in the business. Organizations, I guess, as well now are in a place where, we are challenged to move from just looking at our ROI based on bottom line. And I know this is a challenge as well, but we have to look at it in terms of how are we better able to compete as well in this space that we are in. So a company moving beyond a degree and experience and see the value in the new generation, they need to be willing, to be able to take on that person and upskill them. But that organization's culture need to allow, for that sort of thing. And that's the big thing that needs to happen, which is, the culture shift with organizations. Yeah.
Okay, maybe if you talk to the last question, Once you do so, begin then to summarize, because we will then be moving forward forward to the next other speaker.
Okay, let's see. Last question. Okay, this says part of the problem in SA is rigid requirements and regulators, most preventing training providers from fully embracing technology. Okay, I think that's a comment. Dombi Mjali, what ROI tools, models are being used to show the effectiveness of the digital academy or online? So I can just give an example with based on our academy that we run online in terms of the ROI tools. So we ran a program with 25 entrepreneurs from 5 different provinces in the country. And the ROI tools that we're looking at, so the program was helping the entrepreneurs to be able to innovate beyond COVID-19. So this is when COVID-19 was starting and people's businesses were going down. And the initiative really was based on entrepreneurs should not be sitting at the stage, and folding their hands waiting for COVID to end, because we don't know when COVID is going to end. So how do they start to then rework their business models? And really the ROI that we are using, as the ROI tool that we are using, is looking at how the business has transformed, right, since engaging in the program. And I would think that with every program that you've got with Digital Academy and online, the ROI tools, it's based on what has the program done. So the question and the most important thing that we need to move to as well as learning institutions is not just to sell information and knowledge, but to sell transformation. And that is probably the tool that I would say we need to use and a model to say, when a student has come in and a learner has learned this particular thing, what transformation has taken place? Because, graduation is nice, but transformation is what, we need to look to more than anything else. And I believe that will also eventually solve the problem of, going back to the other question, I think that Samantha had asked, of focusing on a degree and a piece of paper. And I'm not saying degrees are not important. I have, I'm quite an academic myself. I study, I'm still studying. Education is very important to me. But it will also help with the problem of employers and organizations looking at the piece of paper. Because it's no longer going to be about that, but it's going to be more about what the person can do and what they can deliver. So learning for transformation instead of learning for knowledge and information. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Indeed, you tried your level best in terms of responding to most of the questions. I hope that participants will not be angry at us, because there are so many other questions that have been posted in the chat box. You will still be able, as other presenters actually on the stage, please try by all means to then begin to respond to some of the questions that are in the chat box that you could not actually get through. And like I have invited the rest of other people, they should also do so. Thank you very much for a valuable time. Indeed, you were quite useful in terms of addressing the questions of today, which is our topic for today. That says future of work, planning for the future and responding to the emerging skills demand. And you have clearly articulated that so well to say we must actually have a multi-pronged approach where we are not only get stuck because we do not have infrastructure and resources in other parts of our country, but rather as we address those parts of the country, let's move on with other parts of the country which are already on board. So thank you very much. And I guess you'll still be with us to assist. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Batohan.
My pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying on and thank you for your active participation. I can see that you have great appetite in terms of engaging. At this stage, let me then welcome Professor Rasul Hussein, who's going to be addressing us on the next topic. Remember, we have one topic, but then they have a different take in terms of how do they address these issues. Now, he's going to be talking to us about reforms to empower teachers to a post-COVID-19 world, proposing radical reforms to ensure that SETAs step up to the plate in a post-COVID-19 world. I mean, I looked at his presentation and I almost said, but Hussein, what are you trying to say here? It's going to be very, very challenging, very interesting to really listen to him. Over to you, Hussein.
Okay, colleagues, thank you very much for attending, and a special thanks to the NSA for inviting me. It's always a pleasure. Let me shoot on because I've got a big topic and I've got to cover it in 20 minutes. Right, I think, the minister has captured it excellently when the COVID-19 crisis hit our country and the rest of the world. We are constrained in this fight by the very same challenges that we seek to address: poverty, inequality, and unemployment. The very problems we seek to solve are the obstacles standing in our way. And I think, to put it metaphorically, the COVID-19 crisis in South Africa has effectively drained what Donald Trump would often use, the swamp. It has exposed our vulnerabilities, not just in education and training, but in health, housing, social welfare, water and sanitation, you name it. So, yeah, it presents us with many challenges. We have many pandemics. My presentation is, I've tried to keep it as simple as possible. 2 outcomes. I want to present a compelling case to reform the skills development architecture and the SETAs as key delivery agents. So when I talk about the skills development architecture, I'm referring to the system itself. You cannot reform organizations and leave the system intact because that will lead to a design problem. So you need to reconfigure the system and organizations within it, and propose some reforms. I'm sure some of the reforms may gel with you, others may not. And some may be with you and others, not for you. So, but it's my views, and I've been in the skills development environment for a long time. I've been at this, when SETA was first established, I was in the clothing and textile SETA. So I've been through the system and I do have some knowledge of its history. So what's my case for reforming the architecture and the SETA environment? Well, the one big thing is which you have already been speaking about, and that is the unemployment crisis in our country. And I've put the slide with pre-COVID-19 figures. So we go up to January in the graph, right-hand side, up to January 2020. That was just before the lockdown, which started in March. And if you look from 2008, from the Great Recession, the global financial crisis to now, despite all our actions and our words, unemployment has increased. According to the official definition, it has just clipped 30%, 30.1. Unofficial definition, the real definition of unemployment, where you factor in the discouraged workers, it's sitting at 39.7. The numbers in the lockdown, I'm sure many economists will give you projections, and I'm sure many of them will be wrong. We simply do not know what unemployment is going to look like as this lockdown continues and the pandemic continues, because many companies do not know whether they're going to fire, put workers on furlough, and retrench and so on. So we don't know, but this is a pandemic in itself. Unemployment increased to 7.1 million workers. NEET, not in education, training, and unemployment, 45.4 for female, 38.1 for male. In fact, these numbers are much worse than countries that are in the midst of the pandemic at the moment. So that is how great our problem is. and that is before the crisis. The National Treasury and few of the agencies have done some excellent research on scenarios and projections. And what they said is that, listen, let's take 3 scenarios. If there's a quick recovery, hopefully finding a vaccine and something, and then the pandemic is arrested, that's a quick recovery. There may be a slow recovery, and there may be a long recovery. So essentially what National Treasury and its researchers are telling us, if the recovery is quick, we will lose 3 million jobs. If the recovery is slow, we're going to lose 5 million jobs. If the recovery is long, we're going to lose 7 million jobs. And 7 million is equivalent to about 50% of the South African labor force. And that is according to the narrow definition, the official definition. So this is really a big problem. And sectors that are going to be very hard hit are manufacturing, construction, trade, catering, accommodation, which are big absorbers of labor. And of course, financial and business services, which is a major part of our economy, will also be hit. And we can expect wage shocks, skills levy declines, and so on. So that's not good news. And forecasts are that the GDP will decline over the next year or two between 6.5 to 16%, which is another major problem. So what are the big issues? Is the skills development architecture fit for purpose? Well, according to the word of Hussein Rasool, the system is complicated, it is bureaucratic, it is unwieldy, it is incoherent. I ought to know it because when the SETAs were first established, I worked for a SETA as an ETQ, a quality assurance manager, and later as CEO. And now over 20 years, I'm consulting to many SETAs and so on. And I can tell you, we've made all sorts of changes and regulations, but that has not translated into better effectiveness and efficiencies. So, it's something to look at. It's an opportunity. We've missed opportunities, the NSDP 1, 2, 3. We've even missed an opportunity with this NSDP 4. Now here's COVID-19. It presents yet another opportunity to begin to simplify the system, make it friendly to the majority of businesses in this country, which are small businesses. The majority of businesses are not sitting in Sandton. They are small businesses all over the show. It lacks cohesion. I mean, one public entity doesn't talk to another. One statutory body is at war with another. You know the story. It favors big business at the expense of small business. I run a small business. I've claimed my levy a few years, never got the levy. So probably big business is eating up my money for training. And that could be a story of many small businesses. The system is excessively cost heavy, right? So what am I saying is that money that ought to be spent on training is spent on non-training. But that you could say that of the South African public service as well. It is very costly to manage, to monitor, to measure, and to evaluate. Very, very costly indeed. Non-training costs eat up the training budgets. If you look at the SETA system, and these are the rough estimates, the TVET college sector carries twice the number of students for national qualifications at half the SETA budget, at half the total SETA budget. And that tells you that there are lack of efficiencies and effectiveness in the system. How is it that TVET colleges at half the budget are carrying twice the numbers and giving greater access? If you look at the mandatory grant, I remember in 1999, 2000, companies received a 60% rebate for mandatory grants. And there was a great incentive for them to apply. They are now getting a 20% rebate. So if you're a small business, a medium-sized business, is it really worth the effort? For me, it isn't. Administratively, economically, it is an educationally unsound system as it exists currently. The effort that is involved, the effort that CETA's put, massive financial management departments, huge staff, phenomenal amount of money paid to the Auditor General, to private auditors. CETA companies hiring also skills development facilitators, HR training managers, money moving from SARS to the DHET, from DHET to CETAs, from CETAs to employers at huge transactional cost, make the system unsound. At a time where we need resources to be put in the right places. So that is another problem. It needs to be really looked at. We do really look at things in this country, but I don't know, we're somehow afraid to make the tough decisions. Yeah, okay. And then if you look at changes have been incremental in the CETA environment and the skills development architecture over the last 20 years. And this country doesn't need incremental changes. It needs big and bold changes. On the CETA side, you can expect this, and these are figures taken from National Treasury. National Treasury has put downward revisions on the skills development levy to 2-point-something billion, which I think is very optimistic. There's a 4-month skills development holiday, which translates to 6 billion. That's like 1/3 of the CETA income sliced off. And the cost of running a CETA, it's very heavy, right? On the skills priority side, skills priorities are changing, but the system does not allow CETAs to change with the times. And if you want a dynamic skills development environment, we've got to really look at plans and the sector skills plans, the annual budgets, and so on. The discretionary grant side, many CETAs are doing all sorts of things, and there seems to be a lack of collaboration, and these need to be reconsidered in the COVID environment. I think there's a case for restructuring the role and functions of CETAs. I think CETA's scope is too wide. They have too many role functions. They are expected to be everything to everyone. And there needs to be cost efficiencies. We do that very well in the private sector. We need to learn that in the public sector as well. Melody captured this, so I'm not going to talk on it, but what are the further cases for reworking the architecture and the CETA environment is full-time jobs are going to diminish, and the gig economy jobs are going to grow. Despite what, it's like trying to stop a wave that's coming. Remote working will gain traction. Whether you find a vaccine or not, it'll gain traction. We want 20,000 square meters of offices in Sandton when you can have 5,000 and make a big saving on that. Skilling will take precedence over credentialing. Employers want to know what skills do you have? What have you done? And it's going to take precedence over what qualifications you've got. Employee performance will be paramount in tough times. When times are good, people can afford fat in the system, but it doesn't happen when it's tough. New occupations will emerge. Skills gaps will need to be prioritized. We're seeing this now. I've suddenly become skilled with these webinars, sort of. Individuals will be responsible for their own development. This belief in entitlement, that the employee is entitled to education and training, and it's the responsibility of the state and the employer to provide it, will begin to shift. Because if you're going to expect the employer and the state to provide it when they don't have the money, it's not going to happen. So individuals will have to take more responsibility, and online education is going to grow. That's a no-brainer. So let's just talk some reforms. I'm a consultant, so I won't give you all the reforms. I'll give you some of it. The National Skills Development Plan. Tough, difficult, lots of work for the DHET and NSA, but incremental changes lead to incremental results. This plan is a pre-COVID plan. It needs to be scrapped and a new plan developed. The pandemic necessitates new interventions. We need a few impactful interventions. You know, we have the tendency to, in public policy, to give millions of interventions. Why don't we just give a few impactful interventions and try to get there? We get to them. The new plan should be no longer than 2 to 4 pages. People don't have time to read long stories. Business doesn't have time to do so. If you can't say it in 2 to 4 pages, you don't have a plan. Flexibility, brevity, adaptability needs to be in the plan, and monitoring and evaluation. The other thing is that the mandatory grants mechanism needs to be reviewed. We have been reviewing it at the DHET, but it's taking too long. The world has changed and we're still reviewing it. Employers claim a skills levy rebate and tax deduction directly from SARS. Why don't we just simplify the system? Why don't we tell an employer, listen, if you want a mandatory grant rebate, you claim it as a tax deduction from SARS, subject to certain conditions that you have to meet. Why do we have to send money around the whole country and then back to companies at massive financial costs, which haven't been calculated, but it'll run into billions, I can assure you. So, you know, we need to use common sense and simplify things. And, you know, the role of a CETA was intended to be promotion of skills development. The role of a CETA was not supposed to be money management. They are not banks. But, you know, the biggest risk in CETA, the risk that keeps the CEOs and the board awake at night is managing money instead of focusing on skills development, because we give them all these responsibilities. And then SARS is still getting a 2% payment for managing the levy. So, you know, get them to do more work. They need money. We need fewer CETAs. I mean, you're going to see massive declines in the levy. In some CETAs, it's going to be more than in others. But my view is that you're going to see a minimum of 25% decline in the levy income, and it can go up depending on the CETA. And there's a justifiable case for fewer larger CETAs. You know, also the staffing model of CETAs, it's so public service, so 20th century. And it is staffed by, you know, part of the boards are made up of employers, the other part of labor. We need a better staffing model, a more effective staffing model. We can't run it like the way we run in SAA and ESCOM, with massive staffing, and the organizations are stuck in a hole. CETA planning, I think with this COVID-19, we need to relook at planning. Okay, I'm coming to the end, colleagues, so Tabo, don't worry. There's a massive opportunity to decongest campuses, to increase student access through online and blended learning. Now, I understand that people have been saying, and they rightly so, that in the rural areas, they don't have access to online and so on. But I can tell you one thing, it'll be much more cost effective to give students in the rural areas unlimited access to online learning than to keep them in Empire Road at the University of Johannesburg hostel facility for the whole year. Much more cost effective. So we can actually increase the number of people in the TVET and in the higher education system. We can decongest campuses. Why do you need a first year BA student or a BCom student coming to campus full time and so on by using online, which is not a new thing. It's online has been around for a while, and with that comes redesigning curricula, qualifications development need to be speeded up. We need to recognize short courses as a legitimate form of learning. It has to be recognized. People do not have time to go and sit for the whole year for a course. They need to learn something quickly. So that needs to be recognized. We need to reduce student fees with online learning. And I do think that private training providers are a resource that can support national skills development, but they need to be properly managed. And they can play a massive role. I mean, they bring investment into the sector. Change to dual training models on the learnership, apprenticeship, and internship side. The problem that we have in the country currently is that only kids that have access to networks can get into these programs. And for the majority of children that do not have access to networks, whose parents do not own businesses, who are in some far-off area, they do not have access to these very effective programs. So we need to relook at that. It can't be only a small elite that gets access to this. Someone working in the company, they have a nephew, okay, bring them in, give them an apprenticeship and so on. It can't work like that. So this system has to be centralized to give equal access to all kids. And with that comes a whole range like advertising, recruiting, and so on. But there has to be some democracy into this apprenticeship and internship and learnership system, because kids that don't have access to powerful institutions and people can't get into these programs. And that's a shame. Okay, this is my last slide. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. It may have been a bit controversial, but that's who I am. I'm not here to please everyone and to win the beauty contest. So these are my views. Some of them may work, some of them may not. I don't know everything, but thank you very much. Yeah. Tabo?
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much. Like I had actually prepared the participants that this is going to be a rough ride, very interesting indeed. And it's like you are not even mincing your words. You are a real skill development activist. You want to cause a revolution. So look, let me thank you very much for the presentation. Let me just quote from the Minister's Forward in terms of the NSDSP. It says the NDP National Development Plan calls for such an improvement in the quality of education and training to enhance the capabilities of people so that they are active participants in developing the potential of the country. The vision implicit in this is that by growing the economy faster, more people will be drawn into and will create work, thereby raising living standards for all, but particularly of the poor. Then the National Skills Development Plan, which you say must be scrapped, says it is informed by this vision of National Development Plan and proposes that an understanding and determination of the demands of the labor market and of the national priorities must be interpreted into appropriate interventions from education and training institutions. So I'm not sure, after just reading this, whether this will then help, the debates, and also put the National Skills Development Plan into context, because your argument here, Prof, in responding to our question of the day, which is planning for the future and responding to the emerging skills demand, your angle was to talk to the impact of COVID-19 on the current skill development policy framework, including and not limited to National Skills Development Plan, the National Skills Development, the NDP as well as NSDP, as included that is Human Resource Development Strategy. So I hope as participants are now engaging and also writing comments and making questions. I wanted just to put this into perspective so as they know where we are from and where we are at. But indeed, you have actually raised very provocative kind of statements and thinking. And what I appreciate is that you are open-minded. You don't have answers to everything. Let's hear out what participants are saying. Let's take the first questions. What I have here is Regan Govender. He says, what about training interventions that need face-to-face, like basic computer skills? And then let's take the next question. Rian Hoffman says, how can NSA assist TVET colleges with digitization? Okay. And there's another question that I would want you to respond to. This is from Mushtaq Ali, one of the deputy chairpersons of NSA from business. He says, we are constrained in a bureaucratic and regulated education and skills development environment. How does one urgently and on a large scale advance upskilling and reskilling? Let me take the last question. Will be from John Sandis. Would the National Skills Authority be assisting the skill development providers to go digital? So some questions, I'm not sure they actually get to the NSA members themselves. Over to you, Hussein.
Okay, the easy one, guys, there was a question about face-to-face, right? Of course, we will get back to face-to-face when we find a vaccine, right? Or when the pandemic declines. So there's no way that, online learning is great, but it has its limitations. But we're in a situation, right? So that's an easy one. Now, Thabo, I haven't been taking down notes. So what was the second question briefly?
Okay, was it from Mushtaq, where he says we are constrained in a bureaucratic and regulated education and skill development environment. How does one urgently and on a large scale advance upskilling and reskilling?
Well, you know what? I think Mushtaq is right, and that was the outset of my presentation, is that the skills development architecture has become so bureaucratic that it has become ineffective and inefficient. There are even people in the system that don't understand what is happening. So to make it less bureaucratic, you need to take the junk out of the system. We've thought in this country, as we've done with the bargaining councils, that the more regulation we have, the more effective it becomes and the more efficient the system becomes. That may be up to a point, but beyond that, it loses its effectiveness. So we need to simplify the system. I mean, I've given a very good example with the mandatory grants. Why do you want to start moving money all around institutions? Why don't you just tell companies, as they claim a tax rebate for all sorts of things, claim a tax rebate on your mandatory grant? That is a very simple way. And we need to look at every aspect and begin to ask ourselves, how do we make it simple? Workplace skills plans. It gives CETAs information, but the return on investment is not consistent with the effort and the money that is put to run that system. So, we've got to ask ourselves, how can we give the CETAs the insights and information that they need at a much lower cost and, would make the lives of employers easy, man. I run a small business and it's a nightmare. Right. So that's the second one. The third one, Thabo, if I may ask you, I'm sorry, I'll take down notes now.
Yeah. The other questions relates to, they're actually requiring responses from the National Skills Authority. Maybe in short, let me respond to those two questions. which is from John and was it from Rian? One is on skills development providers, the other one on TVES. All what they are saying is let the NSA do something about assisting those two sectors in terms of moving on to digital system. So it's something that the NSA obviously is looking into, but the colleagues should then remember the NSA where it stands. It's all about how does it influence the direction of the framework, the strategic plans. How does it influence also the thinking in the system and advising the minister accordingly? Because by so doing, then the resources shall then follow, such as resources from the CETA financial resources, resources from National Skills Fund, and even resources from the department itself. And the good thing is both of the sectors have a representation in the NSA, in the likes of the private provider representative, as well as one from the TVES. And I hope that the colleagues are actually taking note of such inputs. We will then look into those. Maybe let's move on to the next question, round of question. Ntombi Mchali here is saying, what return of investment tool or models are being used to show the effectiveness of the digital or academic or online, obviously, training? And then Kabo Matekha says, what changes in our schools, school curriculum are precipitated by the rising wave of future jobs? Or is our school curriculum in its current form relevant to produce workers of the future? I want just to take the next question from Klute, Helen Klute. The question shows that our problem is management of upskilling and the unwilling management. Your comments. Can you respond to those?
Yeah, okay, I'll respond to that. The Tamo on the return on investment, digital tools, and so on. Listen, I haven't come across a study that has been done. I think it's the flavor of the month at the moment, but it would be interesting later on, at some stage, when the pandemic declines, for studies to be conducted on the return on investment from digital learning. It'll be very, very interesting indeed. So I don't have an answer for that. The school curricula, is it relevant? Now, I've done research on this for the Department of Basic Education a couple of years ago, and what I learned is that 99% of our school curricula trains children or learners to go to university. The entire system is very academic. And the reality is that the labor market in any country of the world, including the most advanced economies like Germany, Scandinavia, the United States, Canada, do not require 99% of workers in the labor market to have a university education. So no, I don't think our school curricula is geared for the world of work. And yeah, so that's a big issue. The third thing on management, I didn't quite get the question on management, but what I will say is that we need to manage our organizations better. There's always room for that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And let's take the last round of questions here. I see Ben Maringa says the upskilling is more aligned to soft skills and colleges are more focused on hard skills. What kind of support will be offered to colleges in realizing the true potential of training? And Carlos says, for how long will the manufacturing industry have to wait to engage in face-to-face training? This question is focused on industries that do not have the digital infrastructure as yet. Then you have Alvina Pillay, who says, in light of these changes to the way we will have to do training, that is virtual, this will have a huge impact on our BBBEE codes, broad-based Black empowerment, equity empowerment, skills targets, etc. Those are some of the issues that the colleagues are raising. Do you have any comment?
Yes, there's two very important questions that I've picked up, in addition to what you've mentioned, and I'm going to answer these questions very quickly. One is from Mike Stewart. He says, can you point to successful countries or cities that we can learn from? And he's referring to skills development. I think, we must just forget about other countries and systems and ask ourselves, what is the problem in our country and what do we need to do to fix it? We can have many successful systems, but they won't apply in our country. The context is different, the dynamics, the politics, and all that. So that's a very interesting question. So, Mike, I'm telling you, what? Let's see what is our problem and let's just fix it. My other colleague, Ernest Kaplan, who has been with me in the CETA environment from the beginning, asked, should the mandatory grant portion be increased for employers? And my simple answer to that is yes. It has to be an incentive. At 20%, it's not an incentive, Ernest. Okay, now to get on to soft and hard skills, I've got that question. Colleges need to teach both soft and hard skills in the same program. It's not about just teaching hard skills. It's about teaching soft and hard skills in the same program. All right, the program is not holistic. The manufacturing industry face-to-face, when is that going to resume? We have in this country a President's Command Council. I think, they are the people that will make those decisions, and it'll be made on the basis of consultations with the necessary experts in the healthcare sector. So I cannot answer that question. But I do wish that this pandemic, disappears suddenly. Virtual BEE codes, listen, that is not my area of expertise. So, I'm going to be, quite humble enough to tell you, really, I can't answer the question on BBBEE codes. I haven't paid much attention to that. Skills development keeps me very busy, Thabo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hussein. I guess this brings us to the end of the questions time for this session. We will then be preparing ourselves to move to the next presenter. And not unless if you have maybe one last word for you. I have some 30 seconds for you, Prof.
Well, for me, I'm only going to tell you one thing. Incremental changes, which we have seen in the skills development architecture over the last 20 years, has led to incremental results. We are at a situation in this country where we need big changes. And then we need to make bold and tough decisions. And unless we make those, we're going to carry on the same no growth trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure indeed. I take it that participants would want to take you on alert level 1, face-to-face, on your very bold statements of scrapping the system, scrapping the framework and the CETA system. So they are simply waiting for alert level 1. But for now, thank you very much for your valuable inputs indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, at this stage, let me then welcome Ms. Nazrin Mani, who is obviously one of our own. She has actually served the NSA in the last few years, and her term ended with the last administration of the NSA last year. And she then moved on to become the Chief Executive Officer of GEN, now based in Switzerland. Ms. Mani is going to be also taking us discussing various issues, and particularly the questions around the experience, the national experiences, how we can also benefit from her experiences from a global apprenticeship network. Over to you, Nazreen.
Thank you, Thabo, and good morning, good day to all of the attendees. It's good to see some old friends on the chat, and I've been engaging with a few of my former colleagues, and I'm looking forward to the discussion this morning. And you will note that I particularly focused on the future of work beyond COVID, because I think the last few months, although a short period in time in the scheme of time, has really shifted how we look at things in the world and how we address education and training. And Hussein, you and I have worked closely over the years. We share very similar sentiments about really reinvigorating the system. And I think perhaps we have a unique opportunity at the moment to do some things that perhaps would be out of the box, or really shaking up the system, because I think we need that. For those of you who don't know what the Global Apprenticeship Network is, it is a private sector-led alliance in partnership with the international development agencies. So you'll see this is big business sitting here, because we feel that big business has a responsibility to drive innovation and change, and through their value chains can influence small and medium businesses. We have networks across the world in economies as diverse as Australia, New Zealand, to Malawi and Argentina. So we have a good understanding of the various types of partnerships that are needed, how to address this jobs and skills mismatch, and really our focus is on influencing the policy advocacy along with the practice. And what we want to do is have a future of work that looks at decent and sustainable work, and we need to train all segments of the workforce. Now, when GAN started in 2013, it really was focused on the youth voice. It was set up post the last global financial crisis. The idea was that youth unemployment was a major issue across the world, and GAN was developed to demonstrate that apprenticeships could be a really viable pathway into the labor market. And we still believe that, but we've also realized that with the seriously changing nature of work, we can't just focus on one segment of the population. We need to look at the entire workforce, because we have new entrants, we have existing entrants like us who have been working for many years, but still need to be developed. And we've heard about the need for upskilling and reskilling, the need for new skilling to adapt to incoming and new trends. And that's where the workforce needs to be developed as a whole. And we've now had a focus that looks across the board at work-based learning. So not just apprenticeships. So it's not to invalidate apprenticeships, understand that, but it's simply saying there are various forms of work-based learning, from apprenticeships to learnerships to internships and traineeships, along with the other forms of on-job training. And this is an important mechanism to reduce the lack of alignment between the jobs and skills that the labor market needs and the kind of qualifications and skills that entrants have. And GAN has been focusing on that for the last few years, and we're really seeing that this is a key step in driving shifting attitudes. Now, we've seen some stats, and all of you on the chat are knowledgeable in this space and you understanding what's going on. And I've been watching the news from home carefully, because it's my home and my family is still there. And you know, one day I'll come back. But from a global perspective, the numbers are even more frightening. The ILO has just produced research that says at least 178 million young people, if not more by now, are affected around the world. And this means that when the crisis ends, there's going to be a massive fallout in the labor market in terms of jobs and the ability to return to the jobs that we know, because some of them may not exist. But it also means that there is a huge shift at the moment to informality. And one of our major challenges, particularly in South Africa, is the gap between training and development from the informal sector and shifting people into more formal roles. The youth focus is important because we cannot underestimate the impact youth will once again be disproportionately impacted on by this crisis. And if you look at the numbers of those not in employment, education, or training, it's staggering, 267 million people. But we believe as the GAN and our partners that vocational education, TVET systems, and the on-the-job training response will need to shift. We will see a massive disruption. In fact, the survey that we participated in with the ILO, the World Bank, UNESCO, the European Union, and multiple other partners are showing that 98% of those in training have been affected in some form or the other. Some disturbing news is that about 30%, 1/3, may not come back into training. What was encouraging is that at least 50% of employers have moved to some kind of hybrid form. So there is a rapid attempt to address this mismatch and try to put in place digital skilling, which has been the solution in the main. But we also know, and we've heard this morning, the digital divide is real. We know personally that many South Africans don't have access either to infrastructure such as electricity, the cost of data is high, and they don't have possession of hardware and software to enable them to meaningfully engage with digital learning. So we need to overcome those hurdles, those very systemic hurdles first, before we can push digital skilling as a broad-based solution. And if you want to see the output of this research, there is a link on these slides, and I know the slides will be shared, so you're welcome to go and have a look at them. The other issue is understanding that beyond COVID, we need to think about solutions, because there will be a gradual move to some kind of different form of normality. Guy Ryder, the head of the ILO and who is a GAN partner, speaks about this notion of a better normal. I'd like to think we can move to something that is better than what we were in previously, because we know that the systems were inherently disadvantaging large sectors of the population. But in terms of the factors and forces that we see as emerging trends that will influence how the future of work is determined, is the social issue. So shifting to virtual collaboration like we're doing this morning, and it works, but there are limitations. We saw many people on the chat saying they couldn't dial in. Will we be afraid to meet each other in person? We know that the World Health Organization and other scientists are saying that handshakes will no longer be the norm. We will have to find other ways of greeting one another. Our president showed us some interesting ways earlier in March. But also, how do we have the collective experience and the greater good? How do we push that agenda as opposed to my individual needs and wants? And we've seen this happen also around the world, where people don't want to wear masks because they have a right not to. So where are our rights and responsibilities balanced out? The issue of privacy, the more digital we are, the more open we are. The public trust issue is important. We know that governments around the world have taken criticism for how they've responded to the health issue, but we also know that this is now not just a health issue, it's a jobs issue. So around the world, governments are expected to find solutions. We've seen rising unrest, and this issue of generational differences, we saw that emerging. The intergenerational workforce was at pains to work together, but that will continue, and we need to find meaningful ways to work with one another. Then there's the technological shift, and lots of our partners today, our speakers have spoken about digitalization, automation, the impact on jobs, accessibility to digital tools. The shift to online learning is going to be a key differentiator for how people move and integrate into the labor market in future. The economic impact will be premised on how quickly governments can respond. And as GAN, we're working with multiple national and international agencies who are focused on driving solutions around reducing economic volatility, seeing how to manage this growth in the gig economy, because one of the big issues around the gig economy, the fractures that it exposed, was the lack to social resources, the lack of social protection for gig workers. But we're also seeing this rising at the same time with the drive in terms of digital work. And unfortunately, there will be this growing disparity. The last figure said that an additional 70 million people will be pushed into poverty this year as a result of COVID. Those are not figures we want to see, but it means that we have to work even harder as social partners to find solutions. Then there's the whole issue of the environment and what this means for health and safety and access to healthcare, medical supplies, and then the whole issue of sustainability and the green economy. And I think for South Africa, we can see the green economy as a positive because it's going to provide and open up new pathways to work. And the same thing is being replicated around the world. The real opportunities are coming out of the green economy as a meaningful pathway. And the role of vocational education is becoming even more important in this space. And then there's the need for political certainty. But once again, building off Prof. Rasool's last intervention, we need to make sure that we're not overly regulated. We're not overburdened with new legislation that makes life even more cumbersome. And then competition is the key differentiator in the future of work. Productivity and competitiveness are completely intertwined and is what will drive new skills, new jobs, new innovations. We're seeing a massive shift in the supply chain at the moment. One, because the supply chains are shortening. So these long global supply chains have had to respond quickly because in most cases, goods can't get to market. So how do you internally start using product where you've not had the necessary knowledge, skills, and experience for beneficiation? Then for the GAN, our focus is on the private sector. It's what I said when we started. And it's very important to make sure that the private sector is an active partner in driving the innovations. So what we've seen as the GAN in our work is that we're able to engage with our members to drive and shape policy in countries and at a global level. And it's very much about creating this enabling environment because we need to look to the future of work and beyond, but it should be an environment that's not overly burdensome. This overly bureaucratic approaches are not what is going to drive development and innovation in this space. And what we've been doing in many of our partner networks is looking at policies and programs, looking at evaluation and analyzing these policies, and then putting in place projects to try and test. We've seen the shift to different learning methods. As the private sector, we've seen companies even move to things like virtual apprenticeships. It's not impossible, perhaps not ideal because we're still stuck in our very traditional approaches to learning, but they can be done. We've even seen companies do virtual internships. They have done virtual recruitment and virtual onboarding. So it can be done. How do we extrapolate the learnings and build on that? And key for us is this partnership approach. It's very much centered on social dialogue, on collaboration, and looking to work with one another to shift to the system that we need. And then we use GAN's board members to champion work-based learning because there's nothing better than learning and sharing good practice. And if we look to the next part of this slide, you'll see that we have developed a number of strategies around peer-to-peer learning. They've been online, they've been face-to-face, they've been done through research, developing innovations, having the engagement. Because learning by sharing, this peer-to-peer influence and approach is proving to be one of the strongest markers for change. And then developing programs, putting in place practical solutions to test. Now, I want to speak about how to engage with the private sector. It's important for us to make sure that we have a private sector that is able to do outreach, that we're able to design and implement the kind of solutions that we need. And that is built on a system that has meaningful social dialogue, that is built on inclusiveness, so that we can hear and share and respect diverging opinions. We must have sound labor market data. This is something that the NSA partners have been pushing for years. We cannot build and shape a system if we don't know what is happening in the system. You cannot forecast skills needs if you don't know what the trends are going to be in the labor market. And an important aspect in this is planning for skills, not jobs, because jobs will change, but we need to put in place fundamental skills that people can use to become flexible and adaptable to different forms of work. Funding arrangements is a key issue, and this comes out across the world wherever we speak to partners. You must have a system that is properly funded so that partners can engage and deliver on the intent of the system. And then clear roles and responsibilities. It's this issue of accountability. What can we do to make sure that each one of us has clearly defined inputs and outcomes? And then this robust regulatory framework. There has to be a system and structure in place, but building on the last presentation, it has to be one that should not just be driven by compliance, but it should be driven by the needs of this changing future of work. And then some possible scenarios about how we can move in this future that we're seeing coming much faster. In fact, a comment I've made on several discussions I've been involved in is we've spent the last 3 years talking about the future of work, very afraid of what the future of work is going to bring. The last 6 months have brought the future of work home. Teleworking, digital learning, digital training, digital education, trusting employees to give their best when they're working from home and can't be micromanaged. Those are issues that many organizations were very afraid of. But we've had a thrust on us and we've managed. We've shown that we can respond. The other really meaningful win that I've taken from the last 6 months is how quickly governments around the world have responded in terms of policy development and rapid implementation. Having sat with the transition from NSDS 3 to the new National Skills Development Plan, which took over 4 years, we can suddenly see that when governments need to do policy quickly, they can do it. So how do we build on that momentum and make sure that we have that political will to maintain that drive and interest and innovation? So some of these issues around the possible scenarios need high social trust. So we need social dialogue, we need the social partners to engage. And then we need economies to rebound. That is what a successful future of work is going to be premised on. But you can see it's built around tech. It's built around controlling COVID-19. Everything that we're doing from this point onwards is going to hinge on how we can manage the spread of this virus. So we need to have the healthcare systems in place. We need to have the dynamic engagements with people coming back. How will companies introduce efficiencies, but not just at the cost of people, but that we can improve skills of our workforce and ensure that they can respond to this tech-enabled future. The institutional trust is key. The global markets need to open, and we need to have this trust again, this global trust with our partners. I'm going to leave you to work through this. There are some links that you can have a look at where this information is from. There's interesting data out there at the moment and very quickly produced research. And I think in terms of a way forward, for us as the GAN, we will continue to work with our partners to build knowledge. We have to share real life experiences and not hypothetical scenarios. We have to work with our members and partners to implement initiatives, and it's about removing barriers and creating opportunities. And for us, particularly the notion of work-based learning. We need to see that apprenticeships and work-based learning will continue to be that bridge that will transition people, young people in particular, from education to the world of work. But we also know that there are many models, like in the UK, where older people are successfully delivering on apprenticeships. In fact, the highest number of apprenticeship uptake in the last 2 years in the UK has been the older workforce. So it can be done, but there must be relevant skills. So you need to understand the labor market, and you must understand the gaps in the labor market and ensure that the training applies to ensure that the skills are relevant. And then diversity and inclusion, that's key. That's critical, and it's about gender, race, beliefs, and across all social backgrounds. For quality apprenticeships and for us for work-based learning, social dialogue has to be in place because it's about reshaping systems. It's about reshaping this policy framework at an international level. It's about having trust with our partners. It's about meaningful dialogue and engagement that is central to the work. And then a very important task, and I sit on a number of initiatives at the moment, including the G20 structures, where I sit on the business side of those structures. And digitalization is being promoted as the solution. And I have repeatedly, along with several other partners, highlighted that we cannot forget those who do not have access to technology. We cannot have a situation where the already marginalized are more marginalized. So we have to have solutions that are cross-cutting and that meet the needs of the different population and sectors that are out there. But very importantly, it's a shift from compliance, it's a shift to innovation, it's a shift to flexibility, and it's about engaging with the possibilities of what we can be in a future world of work. This is where the GAN operates. These are networks across the world, and you can see in a big world, the 15 networks look small, or the 16 networks, but it's given us access through our international partners through the International Organization of Employers, for example, we reach out to 150 countries in the world. And it means that we can share a message and we can engage with partners, those who are willing and believe in a systems change. And that's how we can achieve what we need in this future that is coming far more rapidly than intended. So thank you very much, Thabo, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Nazri. Well said indeed. I guess you are bringing together the two last presentation to say we then need to have also a quite comprehensive look at how we do work, how we do training, and giving us this global perspective really helps us as South Africans to say sometimes we are too much inwardly looking without necessarily checking what is happening out there. It is important without really comparing us much with the rest of the world, but we have to learn some good practices out there. So thank you very much for painting such a very good picture for us. Now, we are going to be moving to a round of questions, and then you will take 5 questions and then respond to them. And later on, there will be another round because we have about 20 minutes of engagement. Now, one thing that you have maybe did not come out very clearly in your presentation is trying to resolve the issue of informality with regard to skills development and training. To say how can we then fast track, people working and training in a very informal setting to finally recognize them and ensure that they are part of the mainstream, and also they actually assist us in driving the economy upward. So it's something that probably you can reflect on as you respond to questions. Let's see whether we have some questions here. Can you pick any question there, Nazrin, if you already?
Thabo, I know that Flores asked me if I just speak about the Swiss system quickly, so I'll do that, and okay. I'll speak about informality, and let's see, and maybe just about the digital credentialing that Hussein picked on, because I see there's lots of interest in it. Okay. So maybe let me start with those, and if there are more questions, we'll have a look. Sure. So I think just on informality issue, it's very interesting. At the moment today, the ILO starts a course, a free online MOOC on quality apprenticeships, and I'm not sure. I know several partners have signed up already. I'm not sure if the date for registration has passed, but it might be worthwhile for members to go and have a look at. And in fact, the first module is around informal apprenticeships, because our understanding is that you can have training in an informal space. We do lots of work in Kenya at the moment. Kenya is 85% informal in terms of the economy, but there are very interesting trends and lessons coming out from those partners. We're also seeing that, the history of apprenticeships is actually quite informal. When the guilds were formed, I don't know, 400 or 500 years ago, blacksmiths, etc., were informal business owners. But the training started, and it was about passing on expertise. And I think the key thing, even within a structure that's not as formal as a training system like South Africa's, is having some form of standard in place, some kind of quality system, not the complicated quality assurance system that we have within our formal TVET sector, but knowing that the training can be done, that it's passed on from master to apprentice. And we know it happens. We see it in the townships with mechanics. We see it with shoe cobblers on the side of the road. We see it with dressmakers, women who sit with their machines on the side of the road. Where did they learn that? They didn't go to school necessarily or college to learn that. They've learned it from having watched someone and learned and observed those skills. So it can happen. We just need to be able to have a system where employers in the formal sector, whether they're in the public or private sector, actually start recognizing that knowledge that these individuals have. That's a big issue when you shift from informality to formality. Because right now, if you don't have a piece of paper in your hand to prove that you have that particular quality assured diploma or trade test, no one takes you seriously. And I think that's the stumbling block in the shift from informal to formal. It's key, I think, that we look at mechanisms, that we find ways to transition people. I know we tried in South Africa a few years ago with the recognition of prior learning process for apprenticeships. It became very complicated. It became expensive. There must be a way that we can reduce the bureaucracy again. Then this issue of digital credentialing is important. And for the GAN, we've been saying that what is key about micro-credentialing in the digital space, and Hussein spoke about short courses. If you can have stackable learning, so you can do a course, you can go back to work, you can do another course, but you build a portfolio. The issue is, where do you bank that knowledge? Where do you bank the short courses? Because you can go on and do a MOOC today, and you will get a certificate of attendance. What does that certificate of attendance mean to someone doing an assessment of your skills? Should it mean anything at all? Because if you can prove that you can do it, do we need the piece of paper? But I think it's important for people who are doing the learning to be able to bank the learning somewhere. So we're trying to look with our partners to see how can these systems become accessible. Microsoft is doing work in the space. UNESCO has done a lot of work in the space, talking about a skills passport. So we're trying to see how we can manage this effectively, that it can be open source but safe because it's your personal information. And also, how do we build systems within recruitment practices that learning is recognized? Then Floris asked a question about the Swiss approach, and I know we hold the Swiss approach as the gold standard. And one of the reasons is because it's a very, very experienced system. It's 600 years old. Apprenticeship commitment is built into the system. The private sector know that they have companies. I'm talking about small SMEs. In fact, Switzerland has really large companies, but the bulk of the system is built on family-owned companies. They know that they have a responsibility to take young apprentices in. So every September, they have a new intake. That's how they grow their skills base. Right? The other issue that we've seen really interesting is that companies don't receive any financial support. And I'm not advocating for that in South Africa. It's a very different system. But because it's so entrenched in the culture, companies realize it's their responsibility to train. Having said that, there's also a divide even in Switzerland. I was shocked when I came because we see the figures that says, 2/3 of Swiss youth take up apprenticeships. Well, 2/3 of Swiss young people in the German-speaking part of this country go the apprenticeship route. In the French side of the country, it's 4%. There's still a focus on university education. So even the gold standard system is quite fractured to some extent. But as a country, they're still looking to learn and develop. What is useful, so Floris asked about cantons. So just like we have provinces, Switzerland has cantons. They are independent, they're almost mini states because they run themselves to a large degree. But cantons work with schools. Earlier this morning, someone had a question about the role of education, basic education. The cantons work directly with their local schools and businesses, so that businesses go into schools, they do career guidance for learners as young as 11 and 12 years old. Because by the time they're 14, they can select the dual education route, and at age 14, they will go into a company if that's the route they take. So there's an investment from employers, mainly SMEs, to go in and provide labor market understanding, show what the skills in demand are, highlight where there are gaps in training, and then able to influence people's decision, young children's decision making, in fact. There are a couple of questions, Tabo, coming through. Karabo has asked a question around the selection of companies still being heavily reliant on formal education or formal qualifications. And as we plan for the future of work, who should lead? does the labor market demand change what it's looking for, or do we begin to transform education? Karabo, your first part is absolutely right. That still is a challenge. We need to change recruitment and talent development systems. So that's where the GAN is working with our members and trying to influence company attitudes. You're seeing a lot of companies at the moment, big companies, move away from this reliance on a formal degree, for example. I think, Mike, you put up the quote from the US Department of Labor. That's a partner of the GANs, and we're working with them because they have put in place a number of new apprenticeship courses on emerging technology. So it's to your second question, this labor market demand. I think part of labor market demand is important because it must influence new trends in learning and development, but there are some fundamentals in education that must stay. And we know in engineering courses, even in the human resource, in marketing, there are some basics that you can build on. You can't shift from the fundamentals. And then having that layer of the soft skills, and I don't like the term soft skills because we devalue it. I speak about foundational skills because I think that problem solving, empathy, critical thinking, those are foundational to our core. And they will apply to whatever route we take in terms of learning. So Karabo, important points and something that we have to work on. So Adelaine's asking a similar question. Do we need to start relaxing the requirements around certain highest qualifications? Adeline, I think that's really a discussion that we need to have as a country, but we need to have it with our business partners, we need to have it with our labor partners, and with our education and training policymakers, because there are some jobs that require minimum skills. You can't have someone go and practice law, which is very theoretical and has fundamental training elements. If you don't understand, you can't go, it's not easy to do it. That's why often you'll find people are not advised to represent themselves in a court of law, because the law is a technical issue. It's not always about justice. So how do we do that, and how do we engage with policymakers around these issues? I want to just see. So Prof has just said Dr. James Keevy is doing excellent work on digital credentialing, so go and have a look. I think it's really about reading and seeing what's happening. Sam is asking, how can we ensure that apprenticeships are trained not only through the skills levy, but that SMEs get involved? Sam, that's an important issue. In all of the CETAs that I've been involved in over the years, when we receive the workplace training plans, the future training plans, it's 10%. That's the standard return rate across CETAs. So we're missing out on 90% of CETA participants, of CETA members. And some of them may not contribute the levy, but I know in services CETA, where I sat for an extended period of time, 170,000 plus companies fall under services CETA. The bulk of them don't pay the levy, so they're excluded from the system. So it's really about encouraging companies, removing the bureaucracy, finding ways to support the funding where they don't have to go and pay people to do the admin and the paperwork that comes with taking on learners in a learnership or an apprenticeship. We have to find a way where the system can be simplified and tailored to smaller companies. That's what we're seeing here. So I think Dion has asked a similar question around education systems embracing credentialism. Dion, I think that's where the world is moving to. There is going to be this hybrid model of very formal training pathways and then of this credentialing approach, which cannot be undervalued, because I think it's going to give people huge opportunity to respond rapidly to shifting demands in the labor market and understanding and building their knowledge base. Tato, this issue of qualification versus a skill. I know the NQF was supposed to do that around stackability of learning. You know, I always spoke about the NQF offering horizontal and vertical access to learning. We don't see that much. We simply see the vertical where people want to move from one level to the next, but across the levels, they don't really grow their knowledge. We're not seeing that pushed enough. But I think we have to encourage that the skilling side is going to be more significant going forward. We're seeing a future that has to be built on different forms of learning. And in fact, we're talking to partners and entities in the space like edX and Coursera and the range of That's their bread and butter. They're offering credentials, and they're seeing that even universities are taking them on as clients. And I think COVID has showed we have to have a shift in higher education from the very traditional approaches to finding different ways of doing this. Tabo, I think those are the okay. So Google Classrooms be accepted for SMEs that cannot afford systems. Linal, I think we must look at different innovations. They're all there. They're out there. The resources are available. And tomorrow we're waiting to hear from Microsoft, who's a GAN board member, but a really exciting learning project that they're putting out to drive employability in the digital skilling space. The details will be released tomorrow. I will share it with the NSA because it's about using these free resources that are out there. How do you suggest resource sharing across companies? So Metro, I think we know that every company seems to have a different operating system. So it's about using entities like the National Skills Authority to be that repository. It's about embracing the partnerships that we have, using the business side, using our labor partners, using them to disseminate the knowledge and information, because there are ways for us to get the information. We don't have to necessarily build a new system. If you go onto LinkedIn on a daily basis, for example, people share, they share innovations, they share research. It's about building a culture ourselves of this lifelong learning and this daily micro bite-sized learning that we can do in different ways. So thank you, Tabo, and thank you to everyone for your input.
Thank you so much, Nazreen. And I can see the participants are quite happy with the kind of information that they received during this webinar session. One of your slides talks about how to engage the private sector. And you have some bubbles there. And one of the bubbles talks to sound labor market data and a robust regulatory framework. I take it that in South Africa, if we were to strengthen these two elements that obviously informs engagement framework, it would then be fab. Maybe in one or two words, you can then share with us, in terms of your global experience there, to say how does GAN deal with these two elements?
Tabo, thank you. So the one way we do it is engaging in the policy dialogue, because the robust regulatory framework development requires reviewing our policies, reviewing our practices. So we engage in the policy, we review, we work with our partners to analyze, and then we try and identify how can we best find the solution. So can you increase the role of the private sector, for example? We had a very interesting example from Costa Rica and South America last year. In August 2019, the government of Costa Rica introduced the first dual education law in the country. We very quickly identified as GAN that they also have a law that, and for good reason, the law is to end child labor. So that law doesn't allow companies to bring anyone aged 16 years and under into the workplace. But the dual education law says that employers can bring in young people at 14 years to start learning an apprenticeship. Now, those laws are in conflict because if a labor inspector comes into that business, you could be accused of child labor. So we're now working with the government to look at policy alignment, because I think that's another big issue, ensuring policy alignment. How can we ensure that the good intentions in legislation can be put in place without complicating life any further? And I think we've had a long discussion and reference today to this issue of bureaucracy. So that robust regulatory framework means a review of policy. It means scanning the good and best practice around the world as well. And then the meaningful social dialogue and inclusiveness. I think, like you have said, the NSA is a structure in place for that. But I think we must be able to have robust debate. We must be able to have a space that's a safe space to challenge ideas. And we must be able to then take the outcome of that social dialogue to be able to influence that regulatory framework.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tab.
Yes. Now, at this stage, ladies and gentlemen, let me then request the NSA chairperson, Dr. Noaila, to do the summary of the proceedings for today, and then I'll come later on. Thanks. Thanks. Over to you, Dr. Noila.
Thank you very much, Executive Officer. Ladies and gentlemen, protocols observed. Let me take this opportunity to thank the moderator and our speakers. The Executive Officer of the National Skills Authority will pass a vote of thanks at the end. You might have noticed that we had distinguished speakers representing a good spread of different generations, covering various perspectives, ranging from baby boomers and Generation X, as well as the millennials. It is evident from the presentations that there is indeed convergence of perspectives of these different generations in their approach to the 21st century game changers. At this point, let me take you through the summary of the proceedings just briefly. The first presenter was Ms. Melody Kaba. In her presentation, she identified 6 key drivers that have an influence on the future of work. She highlighted the following key drivers that we need to consider. 1, extreme longevity. 2, rise of smart machines and systems. 3, computation of activities. 4, new communication tools that require new media literacies beyond text. 5, increased integration of social media into the workplace. And lastly, increased connectedness with the global world. She also predicted that the required future skills would most likely be social skills and ability to use new mediums to create and leverage on content. The presentation also highlighted some of the emerging scarce skills and occupations we need to take note of. Lastly, Ms. Kaba also showcased practical examples of how these changes are taking place at the workplace with specific reference to the mining industry. The second speaker, Professor Rasool, his presentation focused mainly on proposed reforms on skills development architecture and SETAs beyond COVID-19 pandemic. He gave us an honest reflection about the issues in the skills development landscape and SETAs and proposed drastic reforms to the skills development architecture and the SETAs. The presentation highlighted that further reflections are needed to sharpen and review the policy instruments we are currently using, particularly the National Skills Development Plan and the Post-School Education and Training Policy. Lastly, his presentation also went further into broad changes that are needed in skills planning, including prioritization of small business enterprises. The last presentation by Ms. Nazreen Mani, unlike the other two, focused on global perspectives. Ms. Mani's presentation focused on the possible trends, innovations, and challenges at a global level and how these would influence the future of work. In her presentation, she highlighted the six driving forces that will affect the workplace post the pandemic. These forces include, among others, social, technological, economic, environmental, health, political, regulatory, and competitiveness factors. Furthermore, the presentation examined the pivotal role that the private sector is playing and how it can be engaged to enhance their leading role in the future of work through an illustrative framework for partnerships. She further thrusted the importance of digitization while taking into cognizance the people without technological access, especially in rural areas. Lastly, I also want to thank you participants for your questions and inputs. Your invaluable inputs will further enhance the post-COVID-19 future of work discourse and skills development in South Africa. Once again, on behalf of the National Skills Authority, let me express my appreciation for your participation and support. Partnering together, we can move South Africa forward. At this point, let me call the National Skills Authority Executive Officer, Dr. Mashongwane, to pass a vote of thanks. Over to you, Executive Officer.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks to all our 3 participants. You indeed did great sacrifices by spending time, preparing for this webinar in order to share your knowledge, your experiences with the rest of the South African colleagues and beyond the borders. So thank you very much, particularly also Nazreen, all the way from Switzerland, for making time really in your very busy schedule to plow back. And this is much appreciated. Professor Rasul, we know we are with you in most of the interactions, various interactions and platforms. So we will further engage. And Melody, thank you very much for your participation. You have heard what the chairperson said in terms of intergenerational issues. So obviously, without saying much, he's quite, excited that a very youthful person like yourself, we were able to articulate such great secrets in terms of how the country can forge ahead. Let me then also thank all the participants. I know that the colleagues in the department, the principals of the Department for Education Training, some of them are participating, and various government departments. The colleagues from the SITA sector, SITA system, you are also participating in the quality councils. I can also see that QC2O and other quality councils, such as also the overarching one, SAQA, is also here, South African Qualification Authority. The colleagues from the provinces, you have also participated. Thank you very much. And even all other organizations that I might have not mentioned, thank you for enriching the debate of today. Now, let me just remind you that this is the first part of our NSA webinar series. Then we will then be having the next webinar on the 29th of July, and you will get communication also from our partner, Mail and Guardian. And thanks so much, Mail and Guardian, for partnering with us on this venture. And then the third one on similar series, it will be on the 28th of August. Now, the topics and the focus and the thrust of what shall then be discussed will then be communicated to you in due course. But this is because we want to say how best can the stakeholders and the implementers of skills development assist them in navigating the negative impacts of COVID-19. It has actually affected all of us. Now, I have actually been looking at some of the chats, the comments in the chat. I was actually intrigued by many other. Let me just cite these two in closing. Mr. Tulani Chefuta, who's also a former NSA executive member and the current chairperson of one of the SITAs, said digital skills should be provided as cross-cutting skills in all sectors of the economy and society. Digital skills are not an end on themselves, but the means to do work across sectors. For me, that actually captured the essence of our debates, to say issues around whether we should still pursue formal, curricula, formal degree courses. Indeed, we still have to do so. Most of our participants here, they have behind their names number of degrees. So please do so. And Flora's also one of my colleagues, and who's also very active in this space, said COVID-19 is helping us to move away from our ivory towerism. So centralization has a chance, but it will still take hard work to make sure that everybody has have devices and data to benefit from the collaboration approach. So those statements captures exactly what we are doing today You know, the chairperson that you are seeing here and most of the NSA members who are with us today, we only met once. That is 2 days before the lockdown. That is the only time where we had our face-to-face meeting when we did induction. But most of our work as NSA is done virtually, and it's been such a success. So all of the best, and thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.